My name's Nate Cornwall. I'm a dean at Wayne County Community College. I oversee the firefighting, paramedic, and criminal justice programs. Was a full-time firefighter for a few years. Paramedic. I will not go as deep into the weeds as the gentleman did yesterday from Michigan State Police. Hazmat guys tend to be a bit nerdy and like to get really intricate in what's going on. But we're going to talk a little bit about OSHA. Today was supposed to be about confined space. How many of you actually send people into confined spaces? Let's start with this. This is interactive, so I'm going to call, especially you in the front. Sorry, this is like going to a comedy show. You're screwed. Sorry. So, what is a confined space? Anybody know? What are the three pieces for a confined space? Limited means of ingress and egress, right? Big enough to get in. If I can't get in it, really doesn't make a difference. And yeah, well, that's the limited means of ingress and egress, so big enough to get in and not designed for continuous occupancy. So when I say how many of you go into confined spaces and nobody raised their hand, how many of you have vac trucks? This is where you raise your hand. Okay, great. Do you ever have to clean out that vac truck? Never? Nah, just leave it, it's fine. Or maybe sometimes, right? And who goes inside? Somebody, and that's a confined space. Is it big enough to get in? Yes. We have a manway, right? That's what they call the opening that gets you into that truck, right? Person way, I don't mean to be discriminatory. I'm probably only gonna be able to teach for another year or two, and then I'm gonna be canceled, so I apologize if I offend you. Person way, right? We'll call it a person way. You get into the vehicle and you can clean it out, right? So that's a confined space, limited means of ingress and egress, and not designed to be occupied, but we have to get in there sometimes and clean it out, right? So on the fire side, I was a tech rescue guy. So I did confined space, structural collapse, I'd rappel off the side of the Rensen, all the fun stuff, right? When the fire department calls 911, we show up and we do the cool stuff, right? And that's how I kind of got into safety, and that moved into health and safety, excavations, trench collapses, that kind of thing, right? So how many of you do any sort of trenching or excavations? So that's part of what we do sometimes, right? So that OSHA safety stuff still applies, right? So what is OSHA? What's OSHA stand for? Occupational safety and health, right? Who does OSHA care about? Employers and employees, right? If you're a sole proprietor, you're the only person that ever does anything, OSHA doesn't care about you. Sorry, that's your luck, right? If you have employees, OSHA cares about you, right? Because they care about the employers and the employees. Why do we go to work? Why do you have a business? Why do you have a company? To make money, right? I go to work to pay my child support, alimony, get drunk every 2 weeks. If I can do that, I'm good. I hit the reset. I try to do it for the next 2 weeks. So we're going to talk a little bit about OSHA. It's not super exciting, but how do I get passionate about OSHA? Well, as a paramedic and a firefighter, I responded to a number of incidents. Every excavation or trench collapse that I responded to, if the individual was not out of the trench before we got there, right, if they weren't able to get out, it was a body recovery. It wasn't a rescue. They were dead, and we just dug them out, right? So most of those people were business owners, supervisors. I've been doing this for 30 years. It's never been a problem. I've never had an issue until the day that you do, right? And so it's one thing to kill yourself. It's a whole nother thing to kill somebody else and be responsible. So again, how many of you are managers, supervisors, owners, etc., right? You are responsible for all those individuals that you put into harm's way. How many of you, when you started your business or became a manager, how many did they send to OSHA school? Nobody? Right? Oh, nobody. So you did some training. That's unusual, actually, right? The rest of the room, nobody sent you to OSHA school. They also didn't send you to IRS school, but you got to pay your taxes, right? So you got to figure that out. OSHA's the same way. So when I look at these books, part of what we do, OSHA Training and Consulting, these are the two books. This is construction and this is general industry. So what is your business? Is it construction or is it general industry? If you took my roundtable yesterday, I apologize. The jokes are the same. The first 15, 20 minutes probably going to be the same spiel you heard yesterday. So don't ruin it. Don't give it away. Is your business general industry or construction? You, sir. Both? How do you know? It depends on what you're doing, right? So if I have you and you're my employees and I have you in this room and I say, hey, I want you to change these light bulbs, that's a maintenance function that falls under the general industry standard, this book, right? So where's my fall protection for general industry? What height? 4 foot for general industry, right? What is it for construction? 6 foot. Why is it different? Yeah, right, the floor is softer? No, 2 different groups of people wrote these standards, right? These were construction companies and the government. These were manufacturing companies and the government, and they just came up with different standards. The gentleman yesterday from the state police talked about gases, right? Do you remember how many parts per million we look for carbon monoxide? 35 in general industry, 50 in construction. So it's different, right? So I have you change these light bulbs. That's a maintenance function. Tomorrow, I have you come here and hang up Christmas lights. That's decorating. That's a construction function. So now fall protection is 6 feet, not 4 feet. So what most of my clients do, because it's ridiculous, is they just go to the lower standard, right? So in Michigan, we always want to mess with stuff, right? I don't know how it is in the sewer industry. From the EMS and the fire side, the state offices, we can't just take a national program and accept it. We have to mess with it, right? We have to just put our fingers in it and screw with it, make it difficult. So we do that in the fire and EMS side. And we do that for MIOSHA, right? So MIOSHA is a federal program that the state runs. These are federal books. This is the minimum, right? And then MIOSHA can be more strict, but it can't be less strict than this, right? So, all right, now we know general industry construction, we gotta figure it out. We open it up. This happens to be, you can go to the MIOSHA website, you can print it out. This is MIOSHA part, what is it, 490? Yeah, 490. This is permit required confined spaces. This is the state of Michigan's MIOSHA website. These are PDFs, you can go to the website, download it, free, no problem, right? And you can read through it if you ever wanna take a nap, right? Because it's all written in legalese, right? So the first thing it says is scope. So we said we have 4 foot fall protection in general industry, 6 foot in construction. What if you're on a ladder? What's the fall protection limit? None, because when you open up that fall protection standard, the first thing it says is scope. It says does not apply to ladders. Go see the ladder standard, because a whole other standard exists. And as long as you follow the manufacturer's recommendations, climbing angle, all those things are correct, placement, you don't need fall protection, right? So we worked in factories, we worked in GM, and for a while GM said every time you're off the ground you have to have fall protection. So they would make them climb up 30 feet to attach to an anchor point to come back down to 10 feet where they were working. And OSHA says, okay, time out, listen, don't expose your employees to a higher risk in the name of safety, right? That's stupid, right? It just doesn't make any sense. But somebody, and I'll admit that most safety people went to college, got a safety degree, probably never stepped on a plant floor, never been in an excavation, never been in a construction site. They just went and got an industrial degree, industrial hygiene, right? So they don't have any idea as the practicality. I deal with 3 people, none of them like safety. Business owners, because I tell you that you need to spend money, right? You need to do this safer than you currently do it. And then I deal with line supervisors, and they're usually paid on production, right? They're like, hey, get it done. And I'm like, hey, get your dude off the 5 buckets, go get the scaffolding, stop the process, do it correctly, right? So we don't have an injury. And then the last one is the people doing the work. I come out of the safety office in my little vest with my glasses and air conditioning, and I do my once or twice around the plant. I'm like, hey, put your safety glasses on, put your hearing protection in. And the dudes that are like sweating their ass off, digging in a hole are like, right? They don't want to see the safety guy, right? I do nothing for them. Except for, we went back to why do we go to work? When you go to work, you should be expected to go home with all your fingers, all your toes, all your lungs, all your whatever, right? Have you seen a commercial for like mesothelioma, right? Or asbestosis or all these things? When did they get exposed? 30 years ago, right? In the military, Camp Lejeune has a whole big water thing where they fed the Marines polluted water. I was a Marine. Any prior service? Raise your hand. If you're Air Force, put your hand down. Doesn't count. Right? All right. 'Cause I got some Army jokes, and I just want to make sure that we go through there. Even Coast Guard, you can leave your hand up, but Air Force, not so much. So Camp Lejeune, they said, hey, we gave you this polluted water. It was 35 years ago. It started in like 1950. This is 2022. If you were 18 years old in 1950, right, in the Marine Corps, you're dead. You don't even exist anymore. Your family might get some money, right? So we don't want to do that. We don't want to expose you to things that are going to take away your life, right? And so that's what the OSHA standard does. And again, since they don't send you to OSHA school, that's what we do. My partner Doug already left, but we do equipment sales as well. Shameless plug. He does camera systems. If we can keep you out of the septic system and use a camera, I never expose you to that risk, right? But if you have to get in there, that's where we come back to this OSHA standard and say, okay, we need to do things in a safe manner. Now, I'll tell you this, OSHA does not care how much it costs or how long it takes to do things safely, which sucks, right? They just say, you can't do that. And in very few circumstances do they actually tell you how to fix it. How many of you cut concrete or cement as part of your process? So, silica dust. What do you do to control that dust? Water, all right? So you can use water saws, you can use, what do you do? Mask, respirator, right? That's one of the few standards that OSHA actually tells you how to fix it. The rest of them, they just say, you can't do that. And then you say, well, what should I do? And they're like, well, I don't know, but not that, right? And then, so you do something different, and they're like, no, that doesn't work either, right? But they don't have to tell you how to fix it. So respirable silica is one of the few. When you come to the confined space standard, one of the things that's unique about that is they actually care about proficiency, right? So if you sit in a class, how many of you have had any sort of confined space training? How long was it?
It depends. They were up to 10 weeks.
Jeez, you, sir, I will come work for you. Who said an hour? That's more normal, right? Or 1 day. From the fire service side, when we respond, I have to have a 40-hour rope rescue class before I can take a confined space class. Then I have a 40-hour confined space class. And then to be a confined space technician, I have another 40 to 60 hours on top of that. In general industry, people want a rescue class in 1 day because they don't want to pay for it, right? You don't make any money when you're sitting in a class. So we try to do rescue training over 2 days. You do the first day, and then the second day you do entry and attendant, the second day you do the actual rescue. So I'm going to teach you all today right now how you should do rescue, right? If you enter a confined space. Here we go. Ready? Pay close attention. That's it, right? The answer should be, I just use the winch and I bring them back up. But how many of you have been in confined spaces? What's the first thing you do when you get down in the confined space? I take off my retrieval line.
You gotta have two.
You should have two, right? There should be a backup. And the OSHA standard says you should have a backup. So I say to people, okay, if your winch breaks, what do you do? And they go, but that's not an answer, right? How many of you have done a confined space permit and you put 911 as your rescue team?
Well, that should have been your second backup because you're supposed to already have one on site.
OSHA says you have to, in a reasonable amount of time. And what they've said through letters of interpretation is, and a letter of interpretation is basically somebody writes OSHA with a question. 6 years later, the OSHA lawyers get back with a response and they say, here's our answer, right? So all of those letters of interpretation become part of the OSHA standard. So when I read the standard, I not only have to read this standard, I have to read all those letters and make sure that we comply with all those things, right? So the OSHA says, okay, you got to have a second means of rescue. So how many of you carry 2 winches? Okay, not one, right? Block and tackle. So our backup typically that we suggest is just a bag with a 4-to-1 mechanical advantage, couple of pulleys, double pulleys, and a rope. costs a few $100, sits in a bag, it's good for 100 years, and you clip it onto your tripod, and now you have a secondary means of rescue, right? What's that? Yeah, some way to retrieve them, right? We have to have communication, error, and retrieval. And as long as we have those three things, we're okay. But OSHA says you can disconnect. It's not, you're allowed to disconnect if your connection is going to cause you more entanglement hazards. I have to go up and over pipes. I have to go. So we had a client that did here somewhere, St. Clair Shores, like the nautical mile, right? It dumps out into the Detroit River. And they were a wastewater for the city. A couple things I didn't know. First of all, he's like, yeah, this is like the backup reservoir, right? Like it's like the place where we put the water. But if we get full, we just dump it in the river. I was like, he's like, yeah, no. Worst case scenario, we just open the gates and dump all the shit in the river. I was like, that doesn't seem okay, but whatever. So they had a space that you go down a manhole. They're on like a 10 by 10 concrete platform, and off of that 10 by 10, it drops like 20 feet, and it's this huge reservoir space. And so we did some testing because they had a tripod and a winch. Once you get about 10 feet horizontally from that manhole, you cannot winch them up. It's a severe angle. The cable catches on the manhole lip, and it doesn't work. So they're like, oh, we're fine because we're connected to the thing. I'm like, yeah, but in reality, that doesn't work, right? So we have to do that. I asked about 911 because a lot of places, people will just put 911 on their confined space permit, right? So we said, for a confined space, you have to be big enough to get into, limited means of ingress and egress, and not designed for continuous human occupancy, right? In order to be a permit-required confined space, we add any sort of hazard, right? So we are doing some training. We have some confined space tunnels at the college. We do industrial training, so they're out there. And I was trying to figure out a way to mark the body, and I was going to use a red balloon, like the movie It with the clown. This grown-ass man said to me, if there's a fucking clown down there, I'm killing somebody. I was like, no, there's no clown. I wish to God I had a red nose and like a wig. I would have been down there in a minute. This dude would have freaked out. But we do that training. So we have to have those three things. If there's any other hazard, we consider that a confined space permit required confined space, right? That hazard could be snakes, could be animals, could be water, could be engulfment, could be gases, right? He talked yesterday about gases. What gas do we read for on our monitor? What are we measuring? Hydrogen sulfide, 20 parts per million, right? What else? Carbon monoxide. Again, most of these are set at 35 parts per million because that's the lower of the two standards. So they just set it at 35 and that's easy, right? What else? Oxygen, because in the old days, not that old, in the olden days, this used to be 4 different machines. And we had to do oxygen first because the explosive gases are based off of the oxygen number, right? So you ever go get like a fountain Coke, right? You get the Coca-Cola from the machine. You can have too little syrup, too much carbonation, too little carbonation. That's what that LEL and UEL are, the lower explosive limit and the upper explosive limit. At what point does that alarm go off for the explosive gases? 10% of the lower explosive limit. I don't want to know at 99% I'm about to go boom, right? I want to know well before that, hey, I'm starting to trend like there's something bad in here, right? So it goes off at 10%. So we did explosive gases, we did hydrogen sulfide at 20 parts per million, we did carbon monoxide at 35 parts per million, and we did oxygen 19.5 to 23.5, right? There's about 21%-ish of oxygen in the air. If there's more than that, that's also a problem, right? That's not normal. Something's going on. So I worked with a kid, we'll call him Brad. That's his name. You don't know him. You'll never meet him. Big hillbilly kid, right? And every day we would go to the fire department and we would check our equipment. And we had a 4-gas detector. So I walked around the truck one day. I see Brad. He's got the monitor on. and he's going, like he's blowing into it, right? Nothing happens. Boop, boop, turns it off, puts it away. I said, Brad, what are you doing? He said, well, I'm checking the gas detector. I was like, no, that's cool. I was like, what does that check for? He's like, well, carbon monoxide. I was like, sweet. I said, what do you exhale? He said, carbon dioxide. Different gas, right? So I wasn't mad that you missed that, right? Carbon dioxide, monoxide, right? One little molecule that makes a difference. My point was, for 7 years, we've been coming to work. You turn that thing on, you breathed into it, nothing ever happened. You turned it off and put it away. Like, you never said to me, hey, I think the monitor's broke. It's not responding when I blow into it. Like, what were you doing? Pardon me. I say, it's my Marine. I shouldn't, probably as a presenter. Part of the reason I can't do this much longer. I said, what the hell were you doing? He's like, well, I was just, So, we check for those 4 things, and that multi-gas detector checks for that. We're training somewhere, and we're doing days, afternoons, and midnights. So we trained literally 24 hours straight, right? 3 shifts, 8 hours a day. And the afternoon shift comes in, they bring the monitor, guy turns it on, it's alarming. He goes, boop, boop, turns the alarm off. I was like, what'd you do? He's like, well, I just turned it on. I was like, nah, you turned it on, and then you did something. He's like, well, it's out of calibration, so I have to turn the alarm off. How good is a monitor that's not in calibration? Pretty not good. Yeah, no. Pretty not. Let's not pretend, right? It's no good, no good. So I thought that was bad. So the afternoon shift comes in, or the midnight shift comes in, they turn their monitor on, and the guy goes, boop, boop, beep, 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 just alarming. He goes in, change the settings, and I was like, what'd you do? He's like, well, I just turned it on. I was like, no. And then he's like, oh, the oxygen center is reading 19.5 sensor, so I have to turn the limit down to 19 so that it doesn't constantly alarm. So now this thing is completely useless. And then I say, okay, grab your harness and your tripod. It's in the back of the pickup truck. It comes in soaking wet, right? Like, these are the things that are literally gonna save your life, worst case scenario, and they're completely useless. So we want to look at these OSHA standards and say, when I go to work or I send somebody to work, I should do it safely, right? And I don't expect you to know all of this, right? Nobody sent you to that OSHA school. That's why you pay me. You should pay me. You should hire me. And we do this, right? And you don't need me every day. But maybe you say, I do these 3 types of things, right? I go in this kind of vault. I go in that kind of space. I go in my truck. We can do a safety plan for those 3 things. And whether you go in this truck or a different truck, doesn't matter. It's all the same, right? And then we also sell the, Doug took it. We also sell the equipment, right? We sell the gas monitors. We do all the repairs. How many of you have gas monitors and monitor your spaces? Okay, how do you use the monitor, sir? Like, where do you put it? On the belt, usually. On somebody's belt, right? So the gentleman yesterday talked about gases. If I had this bottle, by the way, vodka in a water bottle or lemonade, nobody knows. So just a tip for your next convention. If I had this bottle full of helium and I opened it up, where would the helium go? Lighter than air, right? Helium balloon's gonna float away. If it was full of propane, where would it go? Yeah, nowhere. I could keep it in the bottle. I could literally pour it out, right? It's heavier than air. It's gonna go down to the bottom. So when we monitor our spaces, right, and I put that on my hip, sometimes people put it right here next to their collar, which is fine. But what's the problem with that if it starts to alarm? What else is right next to that monitor? My face. I don't know that there's something bad until I'm breathing something bad, right? That's not necessarily the best way to do it, right? So we should have a hose, which a lot of them do. Sometimes there's an additional pump that you have to purchase, which we sell. And you put that pump on the monitor, and now I can put the hose on it, and I can put that hose down, and I have layers of air. I have things that are lighter than air, things that are heavier than air, and my good gas or bad gas may be at the top, maybe in the middle, maybe at the bottom, right? So I've got to measure every 4 feet as I go down in that space. if this was a big vault, this room was a huge concrete vault. We do waterways with City of Detroit. They have vaults that go, they're this big, and they go underneath like I-75, like huge vaults. If I drop my air monitor down the hole, have I monitored the gas in that far corner? Nope, not at all, right? So what we do, Tech Rescue Team, we use paint sticks because you can extend them like 10, 15 feet out. We put that hose on there, and as they're going, they measure every 4 feet. Going down, they measure. Then we put somebody in the hole, and then they measure the gas in front of them as they go through those spaces so that we make sure that we are actually getting a reading on the gas in that corner where I'm going to be doing my work, right? And again, I understand, I agree that most of you are like, man, OSHA, who cares, right? Why would you comply with OSHA? What incentivizes you to comply with OSHA requirements? That's the only stick they have, right, is the fines. Now, there are words in these books that say shall, must, will, right? I don't know if anybody's an attorney here, but those words are pretty clear that they're not optional, right? And just because you don't know about it doesn't mean that you don't have to comply with it, right? So if you were going to get in a car accident, would you put your seatbelt on before or after the accident? Probably before, maybe after so we don't get a ticket, right? But at least before is the best case scenario, right? So that we don't have a problem. So if this OSHA book says you have to do training, should we do that before or after we expose you to a space? Before, right? And it's not optional. And so again, I go back to this is one of the few standards that they actually look at proficiency. It doesn't just say you have to sit in a class and get a certificate. Hey, you sat here, you listened to me, blah, 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 like Charlie Brown's teacher, wah, 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 right? And fell asleep and got a certificate. No, it says that you have to show proficiency. If you do your own confined space entry, that's fine. You can do that. You can have a team that does your own entry. But annually, they have to be tested, and they have to show that they're proficient. So you say, on your mark, get set, go, we have an emergency, and they have to be able to respond to that and react appropriately and get that person out, right? I worked, my buddy Brad, that we call him, and he was like 6'4", 280, right? He's a big kid, big country kid. Spit, we called him Chaw. He always had a spit in. Like our ambulance was probably the only one that had like dip spit on the side of it because he would be middle of the night. We'd wake up for a rescue. I'd be like, hey, you gonna go to the rescue with me? He'd be in the lazy boy. He'd be like, what? A dip just running down his. Anyway, so Chaw, I couldn't just pick him up. Now, I'm a strong guy. Look, looks be deceiving. Now, I used to have a six-pack, right? I just had a grandbaby, and I said, well, my grandbaby is not gonna be comfortable like sliding down my six-pack abs, right? That's just not fair to my grandbaby. So I went ahead and I put some weight on just for him. And so I sacrificed my body for him. But anyway, I couldn't pick up 280 pounds and just like press him out of a hole or whatever, right? And it's the same with confined spaces. You look with the people you work with. Anybody work with somebody who's portly, chubby, fluffy? Yeah, you? Okay, don't point, just, yeah. Oh, you are? Yeah, no, you're a little fluffy, that's fine. We can't just lift you out, so I have to use some of these other ways to get you out. It doesn't relieve me of my liability to be able to respond and get you out, right? So this is one of the few standards that says we have to show proficiency in rescue in order to get you out. So I had a guy, and he said, well, we go into holes, but we don't have any hazards. I said, well, what do you go into holes for? He said, well, we go into vaults and we fix pumps in sewage systems. I said, okay. I said, so you go in because they're leaking? Because he's like, yeah. I said, so you don't think being in a cement box with leaking shit water is a hazard? He's like, nah. I'm like, well, yeah. No, it is, right? That's a hazard. So I said, you should have somebody. And he said, well, I send my sales guys in by themselves. Like they go out, one person, guy or girl, or 18 others, and they go out and they go in by themselves and they do the quote, right? This is what you need to replace. And he said, if I sent a whole rescue team out and I had an attendant and a tripod and a thing, he's like, I would never win any bids. I'd be too expensive. Does OSHA care? No. We, the industry, allows us to be unsafe, right? How many of you have ever rented a man lift? Genie lift, whatever, person lift, God bless America, right? So all of those stickers that are usually painted over and scrubbed off, do you know that you shouldn't use that lift if those are painted over and scrubbed off? Like, that's part of the process, is to look at those stickers. Because what do the stickers say? Warning, caution, danger, blah, blah, right? And if those stickers aren't there, we shouldn't use them. But is OSHA going to go after the rental company? No. Nope. Who are they going to go after? You. We're supposed to get you out of here earlier than later. I kind of rambled. Anybody have any questions about OSHA stuff? Any circumstances that potentially you've been in, or any questions about OSHA? Yes, sir.
Say what you were saying yesterday about the hard hat.
Oh, so two things, because somebody asked me to mention this, and the first is, like, sometimes you have a homeowner that will, like, dig up their septic field, take the lid off, and then leave it so you can come pump it, right? Unfortunately, that's a hazard, right? So we think of fall protection as, like, up, right, in the air. Fall protection is if I'm at ground level and I can fall 10 feet, that is still a fall hazard, right? So unfortunately, there have been kids, dogs, right, animals. I heard of one time a duck fell into the septic tank and drowned. It was very foul smelling. All right, that's my only septic joke. I don't know any other ones. But seriously, that could happen, right? So we don't want them to be exposed to that hazard. So then the other piece is hard hats. I'm working with a guy. We tag team teach a lot. And while he's talking, I don't want to listen to him. I've heard it 100 times. I'm reading the instructor's manual. So how many of you wear hard hats or have used a hard hat in your life? Okay. How many of you have ever read the manual for your hard hat? Okay. Well, there is one. No, there is one. I guarantee it, right? Because it's all about liability, right? That company doesn't want the liability of you dying, right? So they're going to say, well, you didn't follow the instructions. So I'm reading his manual. The first thing it says is, when not in use, hard hat must be stored in its original plastic bag, essentially, right? So what do we do when we open a hard hat if we happen to get a new one? It's like Christmas. We shred it and throw it away. Nobody's keeping the bag, right? However, on the bag is a bunch of hazards and warnings, right? And then I read it and it says, hard hat must not be stored below 35 degrees or, what in American, whatever freezing is, right? Not Canadian, 0 degrees. And, well, it's not just Canada. It's really the rest of the world except us and some little country in Africa that use Fahrenheit. But anyway, it says, can't be stored below freezing. So I said, where do you keep your hard hats? He's like, in the trucks. I said, where do you park your trucks? He's like, outside. I was like, do you think you got below freezing last year? He said, yeah, probably, in the winter. I said, you need to throw all your hard hats away and buy new ones. He's like, what the F? Like, I just bought these last year, right? These are all brand new. It says right here, shall not be worn or kept or stored below freezing. The plastic contracts and expands. 3M actually has a hard hat now that responds to UV light because that will degrade plastic. And as it changes color, you have to throw it away and get rid of it. How many of you put stickers on your hard hats? Most construction sites, like, that's the badge of honor, right? They're full of stickers. 3M hard hats say you can put one sticker created by you, by 3M. It's like 2 by 2. You can only put it right here because once I put all those stickers on, I can't see if there's any cracks. I can't do an inspection, right? So I can't see if that hard hat is any good. Why do I care? Well, when I go to court, how many of you have been privy to any sort of court processes? It's a good time, right? So they start to ask you questions. All right, I'm going to give you a little bit of math. Stay with me. Anybody good at math? Anybody's girlfriend good at math? I said, girls are normally good at math, right? Okay, I just need somebody. So you and 3 friends, you go out for the night. You get a little tipsy. You decide that you're going to get a hotel. Well, you're cheap. You're going to get a motel, right? So it's $30. So there's 3 of you. How much is that each person? $10. Great. You're doing good so far. It doesn't get much harder than this. So you go to your room. The manager of the hotel says, hey, I made a mistake. It's only $25 for the room, not $30. He gives $5 to the bellboy, bell person, and says, hey, take this up and give him a refund, right? As the bell person is going up, he says, well, they can't split $5. I'm going to put $2 in my pockets, and I'm going to give them back $1 a piece, right? So you paid $10 each originally, and you get back $1 each from the bellboy. So how much did you each pay? $9. Very good. Stay with me. What is 9 times 3? 27. Plus the $2 in the bellboy's pocket is 29. Where's the other dollar? Ha ha, you all, right? I got you. Right? So you get mad. The bellboy says, hey, I feel guilty. He gives you your $2. He's like, here you go. And now you're looking at $29 and you're pissed. You go to the manager, you're like, you stole $1. Manager says, wait a minute. The room was $25, right? Yes. And then you each got $1 back. So what's 25 plus 3? 28. And then the bellboy gave you back $2, which is 30. There's no missing dollar. Right? My point to that is when you go to court, the lawyer is going to ask you questions, and you only get to say yes or no. You don't get to say, yeah, but blah, blah, blah. You get to say yes or no, and then the judge makes you shut up, right? You don't get to add in your 2 cents. So that when you go back, depending on how I ask you those questions, you can only come to the conclusion that there's a missing dollar, or there's not, right? The reality is the room actually cost you like 25 and then like 30 cents a piece. There's no missing dollar. You each paid, right? There was never a missing dollar. But if I ask you those questions in that order, just like the lawyer's going to, you don't have any option but to say yes. So if it's a good lawyer, you're going to be screwed. And he's going to say, did you store those helmets in their plastic bag? You're going to say, no. And then he's going to say, did you train your employee how to use that hard hat? No, it's a hard hat. Why would I train them how to use a hard hat? That's ridiculous. Well, you should, right? And you should give them that manual so that they know what the manufacturer's recommendations are. I had a client that the company got sold 3 years prior, and she said, I have somebody that says they have hearing loss. What should I do? I said, well, you're screwed, right? If you don't have the old records for hearing tests, and when the company sold, it's a new company, you should have done baseline hearing tests, you're probably going to end up paying this person, right? There's no doubt. I said, do you have any documentation of training? She's like, training for what? I was like, earplugs. She's like, are you an idiot? I was like, no. So the squishy earplugs, right? You have to like roll them and squeeze them. You have to pull your ear up and back and then put the earplug in and hold it till it expands. There's a process. And if you don't know that and you just shove the earplug in your ear and you lose your hearing, that's my fault. That's your fault. Listen, yeah. So these things in OSHA, while they may seem ridiculous, they exist. And whether you want to believe that they exist or not, they exist. Whether you want to follow them or not, they exist. And if something happens, you may go 20 years and nothing happens. The one day that it does, you're going to have to answer to these standards, and you're going to have to say, oof, yeah, this is a problem. So that's why we exist, right? You have an OSHA question, we help you figure it out and charge you some money. And but then we're all safe, right? Because nobody wants to send their employees home dead or injured or sick, and nobody wants to pay a lot of money, right, in a court case where they can't answer a question. That's about my spiel. Any questions? Yes. If you have a question, Lucio is going to bring you a microphone. So
a couple years ago, I had OSHA show up at my job site, and they inspected our helmets. They were expired. There's a date inside the helmet. I just want to let everybody know that. There just don't go by the condition. They were expired, I got a warning, and my excavators were on site. I had the danger on the back, keep clear of counterweights. They have to be in the size of the machine as well.
Yeah. And so OSHA says their fines, OSHA said, hey, we don't want to do this every year. So we passed a law a few years back that said they automatically go up by the cost of living. So they get adjusted. Currently this year, they're like at $13,000 some $100 per fine. And that's per occurrence. So if I have just you folks, right, and say I didn't teach you forklift training and I had you driving forklifts, it's 13,000, 13,000, 13,000, 13,000, 13,000, 13,000, 13,000. It's not once I didn't have an OSHA program. It's every single occurrence that I expose somebody to. Now, they don't want to put you out of business, right? They'll negotiate with you. If they come back and it's found to be a willful or a repeat violation, guess what happens to that fine? 10 times. 130,000, 130,000, 130,000, 130, 130, 130, 130. It's no joke, right? That's the only stick that they have to get you to comply. Because other than that, the randomness is, if I talked to an OSHA investigator, he said basically if we tried to inspect every business in Michigan, it would take us 70 years. There's like 6 of us in the office, right? And all these businesses, we couldn't possibly do it. So they come out for fatalities. They come out for complaints, right? And again, you have employees, you inevitably fire somebody and they write a letter to OSHA and say they're unsafe. And then OSHA may or may not come out and ask you what you're doing. But the fines is the only thing that they have. We just had at the college, OSHA come out. We had some respiratory problems with our respiratory program. We do firefighter training, so we have a burn room, and we didn't have the appropriate respiratory system in place. Now, I've told them that for the last 3 years. They didn't listen until what? Till the OSHA investigator came out, and he said, hey, and then gave us a fine. So now all of a sudden we're like, hey, we should do this. I was like, well, yeah, no shit. We should have done that for the last 3 years, right? So you can roll the dice, and you cannot do it. Now, OSHA only cares about employers and employees. So when I was a kid, I went to church, believe it or not, and we had a gymnasium, a ceiling like this, and we had big lights. And so they put up like 3 sections of scaffolding and then an A-frame ladder on top. And I'm little at this time, like 12, right? So I have to stand on the top step of the ladder. Should you stand on the top step? No. Shake your heads, no, right? You're not supposed to, you got to, like, it says don't stand higher than this, right? So I'm up there and I'm like, and I'm like trying to get these 7-foot tube lights out. And I was like, should there be some sort of like safety? And the old man that was there was like, God's got you. I was like, could God use a net? Because I'm not so sure like that if I fell, God's gonna like catch me and lay me on the ground, right? I'm pretty sure I'm gonna die. But OSHA wouldn't have cared, right? I'm volunteering at a church. There was a guy that died, H2S, right? What's that, hydrogen sulfide? That gas is naturally occurring, comes from like decomposition. So he was cleaning out like a culvert and had a lot of decomposition and stuff going on. Went in there, took a few breaths, right? When we say IDLH, do you remember what that stands for? Immediately dangerous to life and health. It means one breath can knock you out, right? He gets knocked out, he dies. Did OSHA care? No, he was a volunteer. He was volunteering at the church. Had he been a paid maintenance employee, yes, OSHA would have cared. So you can take your chances. I recommend you don't because the fines can be pretty severe. OSHA's not in the business of putting people out of business, but they had a guy that had a business that was doing some excavating. And there was no injury, but over 6 months, he repeatedly exposed his employees to excavation hazards, right? He had these big trenches, was doing a contract job for the state of Michigan. He was actually out of North Dakota. And OSHA came in, they took away his contractor's license in North Dakota and in Michigan. They said, you cannot work or own a construction company or be a supervisor in the United States again unless you contact OSHA and explain what you're going to do, and then we'll approve or disapprove. They fined him about $250,000. They shut him down. They took away his birthday. Like, it was over. They don't typically do that, but they can, right? So we just like to scare you enough that you pay me to help you. That's it. Any other questions? Any other OSHA experiences? Any other fun OSHA stuff? Nobody fell asleep. That was good. Yes. Stop talking. Wait for the microphone. There you go.
My son has a marina business, and so I'm one of those folks, what should he go by? The construction one or the industry one?
Well, remember, it depends on what your job function is, not on what your company is. So again, if I have you changing these light bulbs, that's a maintenance function, your general industry. If I have you hang Christmas lights, that's decorating, that's a construction function. So really both of them could apply depending on what he asks his employees to do. If they're doing maintenance functions, it's general industry. If they're doing construction functions, which are pretty loose, it's under the construction standard. So what most of my clients will do is they'll say, fall protection 4 feet, right? That's the lower of the two standards. I don't have to worry about it. Carbon monoxide, 35 parts per million. That's the lower of the two standards. I don't have to worry about it. So that's what most of my clients will do is they just go to the safer standard and then it doesn't matter. So my answer is both, potentially, depending on what they're doing. If not, that's all I got. My name's Nate Cornwall again. Doug was here. He does the camera system. So if I can avoid putting somebody into a confined space and use a camera type system, I eliminate the hazard, right? So I always say like, okay, OSHA has this triangle that they use for how we should eliminate hazards. So I have a zoo, I have a shark, right? His name's Mo. We'll call him Mo. It's a cool shark name, right? And I need you to feed Mo, right? And so, well, you should swim in and feed him by hand. He's a little particular about how he eats. That's pretty dangerous, right? So, okay, so OSHA says, well, maybe we can do some sort of engineering practice and fix it. So maybe I could have a rope system and a bucket, and we dump the food in and he eats it. Well, he still doesn't eat, right? So that doesn't work. So now we say, okay, well, maybe I have a practice where I put the food on the end of a stick and I put it in his mouth, right? That would be a process that the employee has to follow in order to be safe, right? So that's the next level down. Well, he still doesn't like that. So the last thing that OSHA says you could do is PPE. So when I tell you to put your safety glasses on or put your hearing protection in, that's because that is the last line of defense and the only thing that we can protect you from going blind or going deaf is using that PPE, right? So now I say, I'm gonna have you feed the shark, but you're gonna wear this chainmail suit, right? If I asked you to do that, would you wear that chainmail suit? But abso-freaking-lutely, right? At least that way, if I get chomped by the shark, I'm good, right? Same with your safety glasses, same with your ear protection, same with your employees. So when you're asking them to put their goggles down, it's not something minuscule. It means that the only way I can protect you is by making you wear those safety glasses. And that's a big deal, right? So wear the freaking safety glasses. Wear the ear protection, right? So that you go home with all your body parts. Anything else? Yes?
I just want to say, if we were going to use a consultant, we'd use you. We like your style.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Yep. I'm available. Like I said, feel free to email, call. And I don't tell you stuff. So I have some sayings in safety. First is everybody's a liar, especially my ex-girlfriend. Yeah, in a room this size, statistically, probably some of you know her. She's a whore. But it's just math. It is. I'm sorry. And when I say that, what I say is I don't just tell you something because I'm bored or I want to have fun. I'm going to give you, hey, 29 CFR 1910 Part 1, Part 5, subsection DA says this. This is why you have to do it. I don't want you to waste money. I want you to be profitable. But at the same time, if I'm consulting you, I want you to make sure that you understand what your responsibilities are. And so I'm going to give you that reference, right? So everybody's a liar. Make sure you follow up, investigate, read, and I'm going to give you that proof so you can look at it yourself, right? Another one is, that guy talked yesterday about the gases, right? My exposure limit is 0 parts per million. I don't want any of your stuff in me, right? Because when we look at those mesothelioma commercials, they were 30 years ago. I don't want you to look back in 30 years and say, oh, sorry, you got double lung cancer and we did the math wrong. You shouldn't have been exposed to that much. So I try to be exposed to nothing, right? And that's what we should try to do for our employees as well. Anything else? These actually, you can buy, the company is RegLogic, RegLogic. And inside of here, the other thing that it says that makes it a little bit difficult is after the scope, which is the first paragraph, the second paragraph says adoption of other standards included. So it may reference NFPA, which is National Fire Protection Association, life safety codes. It may reference NIOSH, National Institute of Safety and Health, where they do a lot of testing. It may reference ANSI. So if you look at safety glasses, they're like Z95 is the ANSI code for safety glasses. So the OSHA standard is going to reference a bunch of other standards that you also have to read. But you can buy these at RegLogic. And then once you come in here, the nice thing about these is there's some little envelopes. And again, the envelope is you wrote OSHA a letter. 6 years later, they responded and said, hey, this is our interpretation. And all of those become part of the standard. So you have to look all those letters of interpretation as well. But RegLogic, and I think they're maybe $50. In order to teach the OSHA 10 and 30-hour classes, you have to have 5 years of experience in health and safety in general industry or in health and safety in construction. It's not just like, hey, I built houses. You had to do health and safety stuff in construction for 5 years or health and safety stuff in general industry for 5 years. And then you can teach the classes. But it's good side business. Anything else?
Yeah. Sometimes you can go to the fire department sales training too. You can train with them.
So they do. So I'm a firefighter by trade, a fire instructor too for the state of Michigan. And we do, but we stopped a lot of it because of liability. Like, so for example, we used to do the child seat fittings, like how do you put your your car carrier in the car? And we stopped because of the liability. There's so many different types of car seats.
We used to train with the fire department, because that was our second response for going into confined space, 50 feet down the ground.
Most fire departments do not do confined space. I don't know where you were at exactly. So I was in Wayne County, other than Detroit, right? And we had 45 guys from 26 departments, and we had a team. It's expensive. It takes a ton of training. I have more hours than it would take to get a master's degree in technical rescue than it would take to get a master's degree. So you have to pay for all that. So most fire departments do not do confined space rescue. So the OSHA standard says if you're going to go in a confined space, you have to call the rescue agency. They have to come out and look at your space and say, yes, we can do the rescue. Yes, we will be available. And yes, all that's good. And then you can put them as your 911 response. Other than that, you can't put them on your permit because most of them don't do it.
We were both working, or the fire department and our company was both working for the same township, so I don't know if that might have been a partnership.
Yeah.
We agreed to do.
It may have been, but again, in my experience, most fire departments do not do confined space rescue. They don't do high angle rescue. They don't do trench collapse because of the expense and the equipment. Our rescue team had 4 trucks. We had a big beverage truck, used to be a beer truck. Too bad it wasn't still beer. And it was full of rescue equipment. We had a big state truck that was full of trench collapse equipment, probably $1 million worth of equipment in order to do technical rescue. So you just have to call them first and say, hey, do you do confined space?
That was first coming out back in 99, 2000.
Oh, I remember the second grade. Sorry, just being yeah, so it just depends. You'd have to call the fire department and find out whether or not they do that kind of rescue if you want to use them. Anything else? I have ADD, so I'm all over the place. Anything? All right, thank you very much. Appreciate your time. Thank you for staying. And if you have any questions or issues, feel free to give us a call. We'll try to do the best we can to point you in the right direction if we can help you out.